Thanks everybody for joining our Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Goat webinar series. I want to welcome you back. Maybe some of you have viewed our webinars in the past, or we may have some new participants online here today, but I want to welcome you to our series. This is a series specifically for dairy goat management, and this is under our Sustainable Dairy Goat Agri-Systems grant. So we have a grant that's supporting some of the work that we're doing in the next few years. And so you'll learn more about that as that project continues. But to introduce myself, my name is Jennifer Bentley, and I work with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach as a dairy field specialist, and I'm housed in Northeast Iowa, so based in Winneshiek County. But I know we have participants from all over the U.S. and actually in some other countries as well. So thanks for logging on here today. This webinar is being recorded, and I will do a follow-up email post-webinar to give you the link to the archived webinar. We do have a YouTube channel that we house all of our past webinars on. So if you want to go back and review the information or share it with other people, you certainly can do that. This webinar also is available for ARPAS credits. So if you are wanting to do that, you can go into the ARPAS there and get your continuing education credits there. So as a reminder, we do have one more upcoming webinar this spring on May 15th, and that's going to be with Dr. Pat Gordon talking about antimicrobial stewardship in dairy goats. And that'll be the last webinar for the spring, and then we're going to take the summer off, and then we'll be back in the fall in September. So I'll make sure to keep you up to date on the upcoming webinars as we approach those this fall as well. So with that, I'm going to start our topic here today with buck management, and I want to introduce Carolyn Ihde. She's our small ruminant outreach specialist. She has a joint position with University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. And so a little bit about Carolyn. She grew up on a diversified farm in south central Iowa. She has a deep-rooted passion for agriculture from an early age, and she pursued her academic interest at Iowa State University, where she earned a Master of Science in Ag Education. And she provides a wide range of educational opportunities to enhance biosecurity, improve animal production, and increase profitability. So in addition to her professional role, Carolyn is also a shepherd in Northeast Iowa, managing her own flock of fiber and meat sheep. On her farm, she implements rotational grazing, integrated parasite management, and composting practices to ensure the health and sustainability of her flock. So with that, thanks for being with us here today, Carolyn, and we're going to have you take it away.
Okay, great. Did you want to do the polls now or in a little bit?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Thanks for reminding me.
Oh, you're welcome.
So we do have a few questions that we want to ask our audience before we get started, just kind of help us learn more about who's on the call here today and in relation to the topic that we're going to be presenting. So you should be able to see the poll here. Carolyn, do you see it?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So we have three questions there. One is, do you currently have a biosecurity plan? So if you're able to answer that, go ahead. Second question that's on here is, what are the barriers to implementing a biosecurity plan on your farm? And here you can type in your answers, short answer if you want. Otherwise, if you aren't able to use that feature, you can also put it in the chat. So any barriers that are keeping you from implementing a biosecurity plan on your farm. And then the third question is, do bucks receive a breeding soundness exam before breeding? So we'll give people a few seconds here to respond to those questions. And I think these are all things that, Carolyn, you're going to cover here in your presentation.
Yeah, along with a few other things. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And while people are filling that out, I will include the PDF of today's presentation in the chats once we finish up this poll here. Kind of looks like our participants are slowing down here, so I'm going to end the poll and then we'll share those. So it looks like about 83% say they have a biosecurity plan. Let's see. I'm not quite sure if I can see the responses to barriers there, Carolyn. I've never done a short answer one before, so I might have to do some digging on that. And
It might
then,
show up in our poll results later, so.
oh, okay. And then do bucks receive a breeding soundness exam? And we have 33% say yes and 67% say no. So thanks for filling that out. And I'm going to stop sharing and go ahead, Carolyn.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you for having me today. I hope everybody's been enjoying the nice warm, or maybe not warm, but sunny weather that we've had. And our tulips and daffodils and little bulbs are starting to come up. And I also hope that you've been enjoying lots of bouncing babies around. But today we're going to focus on how those babies came to be. And we're going to focus a lot on that goat, the buck. So thinking about what he brings to the table. And like Jennifer said, my name is Carolyn Ihde, and I work with Extension in both Wisconsin and Iowa, producing educational opportunities for beginning producers for both sheep and goats. So today we have a broad discussion. We're going to cover a lot of different topics today. Hopefully we get through most of these. If not, maybe we'll have to do a part two another time. But we're going to talk about the importance of the buck, biosecurity, selection criteria, health and diseases, breeding soundness exams, body condition scores, and nutrition. So those are the broader topics that we're going to cover today. And please feel free to put any questions in the chat, and we can hopefully answer those as we get going. So thinking about the importance of the buck. So we have to have him to have babies, right? So when we think about how we get the babies, we have to have the buck on the farm. And his genetic contribution is about, we say 50%, but it actually can be up to more than that, just how genetics work. But we want to make sure that we are bringing in bucks that are going to improve our genetic profile of our doe flock. So thinking about how that buck helps us is very important. And so also thinking about how many does a buck can cover. He's spreading his genetic up to maybe 40 to 50 does once he is mature. So selection is very important. And we're going to talk about selection here in a little bit. And if we can have one buck and he is effectively mating with several does, we can spread the expense over multiple does. And then herd improvement, like I said, we want to make sure that we're bringing in high quality bucks to enhance the performance and the productivity of our does when we keep replacement females. And poor quality bucks can have a negative effect on our genetic quality. So ensuring that we are purchasing or bringing in bucks from high quality parents, having a conversation with our breeders to make sure that those bucks are matching the goals that we have as we move forward. So making sure that they're coming from herds that have proven track records of goat milk production, udder health, and overall herd performance. Breeding values, some herds are covered and they have breeding values established. So that's another good way to figure out what those genetic potential that he is bringing to your flock or herd. So they can estimate the traits such as milk yield, growth rates, and reproductive performance. Our physical characteristics when we're working and thinking about choosing a buck, choose bucks with strong, well-balanced conformation, and that's a straight back, strong legs, well-developed chest, and our size and muscular. So our bucks are larger and more muscular than our breeding does, but we also should be making sure that those conformation aspects that he has are going to be appropriate for breeding with our does. So health and vitality, we want to make sure that they are coming from disease-free herds, free of yonis, CAE, and CL, especially if you are working towards having these as goals to be free of these diseases, or also if you are just bringing in and starting your herd, Starting with a clean, free herd is easier to begin with than trying to come back and get some of those diseases eliminated from your herd at the time. So making sure that those animals have been tested and that you are asking for those test results when you're bringing in new animals. And check that the buck is up to date on vaccinations. And I have here that they have been regular dewormed. However, we know that regular deworming may not be the best protocol that we have for our dewormer resistance parasites. So making sure that that deworming schedule or protocol that the farmer has been using matches kind of your criteria and your goals as well. And getting a fecal egg count on that buck before he comes to your farm. So some reproductive traits that we'll want to take an evaluation of is the scrotal circumference, because a larger scrotal circumference is often associated with higher fertility and better reproduction. We also want to evaluate the libido and mating ability. So observe their behavior once the breeding season starts. Some bucks who are older or maybe a little overweight, they tend to have less libido. So making sure that they are sufficiently active and able to mate. So temperament. Also thinking about the temperament of that buck, because we on dairies we tend to have that buck out with our breeding females sometimes during lactation, and we'll want to make sure that they're easy to move and work with. So docility is also important to reduce the stress for both you and the does on the farm. So review the milk production records of the buck's dam and other female relatives are a good indicator of how those genetic traits will be passed on to his daughters. And then consider the longevity and the overall health of the buck and its relatives so that you're able to increase longevity within your flock. So that the longer that we keep animals in our herds and productive in our herds decreases that value over time. So making sure that we are able to have longevity with our bucks and our does is important as a concept of profitability. And we talked about a little bit about breeder reputability. So making sure that you are, sourcing your breeding bucks from a reputable breeder who has records and a health and the genetic standards that you are wanting to bring in. And seek references and ask from other goat producers if they have purchased animals from this producer before, and just to try to make sure that we're bringing in the best quality bucks. So now that we've selected that buck that we want to purchase, we have to think about the biosecurity. So before we purchase the bucks and bring them home, we want to have a health certification. So the breeder should obtain a CBI from their veterinarian to make sure that those animals are fit for travel and they do not have any diseases at that time. And then you'll want to ask for their health records, vaccination, and previous illnesses and treatments. And another important aspect would be to ask for a biosecurity scan. So having those bucks tested and having their results for Yoni, CAE, and CL will also be an enhancement to your biosecurity plan. And then that visual inspection. Do they have any obvious signs of illness, lameness, abscesses, runny eyes, or nose, or poor coat condition? So what exactly does that buck look like on a visual standard as health are also good. And then looking at body condition, we know that body condition changes over the seasons, but if they're a young buck, they should be carrying a decent amount of cover of muscle and fat so that they are able to breed in the upcoming breeding season. Because we know a lot of our rams and bucks, they tend not to eat during the breeding season and they will lose some condition. So making sure that they're up on their body condition and health prior to turnout is extremely important. So bringing the buck home, once we have him, we purchased him, he's healthy, he's ready to come to our farm. The buck should be actually isolated from the rest of the herd for 30 days. And that 30 days allows us time to observe that buck, making sure that he's adjusting well to our feed and water, making sure that if he does have any illnesses that we're able to treat him individually instead of sending him out to the herd, and now he's able to transmit disease or illness to the rest of the herd. So that isolation period is very important to keep that buck separate from the rest of the herd for at least 30 days. So they should be kept in separate facilities, so a separate area away from the main herd. We'd like to avoid nose-to-nose contact, so they actually should be separated by no less than about 6 feet in order to make sure that, you know, any illnesses or bacteria, pathogens that are aerosolized are not able to be coughed or sneezed onto our other herd mates. So separate facilities with separate areas, and then avoid sharing feeding and watering equipment is also important because diseases also can be transmitted through feed and water. And then monitor for any signs and symptoms of illness during this 30 days, and then consult with your veterinarian or contact the breeder to see if, you know, if their herd has gone through anything since the ram has been removed, because some of the incubation times, they could have looked healthy at that time, but there could have been an incubation time in between the time that you purchased them or brought them home and now. And then, like I said, consult with your veterinarian for any health issues. And another good biosecurity tip would to make sure that you care for this new animal last in your chore rotation, so that you're not transmitting diseases from, you know, your hands, clothing, or boots, or whatever that might be. So another important thing would be cleaning and disinfecting equipment. So clean and disinfect any equipment that this buck would have used if you're, you know, sharing buckets, not sharing buckets, but moving from one area to another. If you're moving him to a different housing, make sure that you clean and disinfect when he leaves. Like I said, handling equipment also. Change your footwear and clothing after handling the new buck so that you're not, like I said, transmitting anything. And disinfecting protocol, those of you in the dairy world are really good at cleaning and disinfecting protocols. You're familiar with them through the milk processing. But remove any dirt and debris and manure, wash with detergent, rinse with water, and then apply your disinfectants. And make sure that you are reading the labels, because different disinfectants need different contact times in order to be have their most effective potencies. And once you observe the ram or buck for 30 days, and you're going to want to put them into the herd, but ensure that the new buck is vaccinating according to your herd vaccination protocol before integrating them into the herd. So a lot of those vaccinations will have an initial dose and then a booster. So making sure that they have both of those vaccines before putting them into the herd, so that their vaccination status will match your home herd's vaccination status. And then after isolation, gradually introduce the new buck to the herd. You could introduce them by fence lines. I'm talking about when you're introducing them into the doe herd. Introducing them into the buck crowd is a little bit different, so you'll want to make sure that you're slowly introducing them into the groups, because bucks will want to figure out a hierarchy, a pecking order, and so there will be quite a lot of aggression and stress at this time. So make sure that you're observing them for any injury or any excessive behavior, so that you're able to protect both the new buck and any existing animals from your farm. And then continue monitoring and making sure that you're continuing with biosecurity practices. If you're coming and going to other farms, or if you go to fairs and events, keeping footwear that's farm-only footwear and off-farm footwear is a good idea, so that you can keep your herd healthy. So do we have any questions about biosecurity at this time? Because we're going to be moving a little bit onto a different topic. Okay. Awesome. So we talked a little bit about selection and conformation. So I think we might just kind of go through these parts as well. But each breed will have its different breed standards. And if you are wanting to have a registered or a high grade herd, then making sure that your breed and those animals are fitting into the breed's conformation standards. So you'll want their general appearance to meet those qualifications for breed standards. Their head and neck should be well proportioned to their body. Their body structure should also match the breed standards, and they should always be standing on a strong set of legs and feet for mobility and longevity in the herd. When we're selecting our bucks, we'll want to make sure that we are observing and palpating the reproductive, the scrotum, to make sure that there are no defects with the testes. And then also coat and skin, because goats can have lice and mange and those different things. So we want to make sure that they do have a clean and disease-free coat and skin. So like I said before, bucks should be masculine, exhibit strong masculine features with a robust and sturdy build, well proportioned with smooth and blending of all parts. Like again, straight back, top line, well-aligned legs. And so the head and neck should be broad and strong with straight or slightly dished profile. Eyes are bright and alert. And then neck is moderate length, blending smoothly into the shoulders, and it should be strong and muscular. Body structure, so their chest and shoulders is a deep, wide chest with well-developed shoulders is essential for strength and respiratory efficiency. So making sure that they have a large capacity for their lungs to be work and housed. The back and loin should be straight and strong with a level loin, and this produces support for the buck's muscular build and his reproductive organs. A rump with a wide and slightly sloping, providing a strong base for his hindquarters so that he can get his job done. Legs and feet, legs should be straight and well placed with strong pasterns. This ensures good mobility and reduces the risk of joint issues. So feet, hooves should be well formed and adequately trimmed with no signs of lameness or deficiencies and deformities. And looking at the, too many tips. The testes should be equal in size, well developed and firm. A larger circumference is also associated with higher fertility. And the purpose should be clean and free from any signs of infection or injury. So those are the things that we can just physically examine prior to purchase. And then even if we can also think about these things about the bucks that we currently have on our farm. So making sure that they are meeting the criteria as well. And coat and skin healthy and glossy and supple and free of lesions. So dairy bucks pass on a variety of important characteristics to their offspring, which can significantly impact the productivity and health of the herd. So their traits can be for milk production, udder health and structure, reproduction, growth in body and conformation, and disease resistance, longevity and durability. And they should also be adapted to your environment. So let's say that you have a system that you're wanting to produce your goats in, maybe a grass-based system or more of a grazing, then purchasing or selecting bucks that come from that similar environment will be a good idea to do as well. So in the traits, milk production is strongly influenced by the traits related to milk yield, and that is the volume of milk, fat and protein content, and udder health and structure. So bucks contribute to the genetic makeup of their offspring's udder conformation, udder attachment, teat placement, overall udder health. And good udder structure is crucial for efficient milking and reducing the risk of mastitis. So those females will need to have properly designed udders, maybe unlike the doe that's pictured in this picture. So they also have reproductive traits for fertility that they pass on to their offspring, kidding ease, and reproduction. So like I said, it's really important to have proper leg structure, back strength, and body capacity. We can also think of disease resistance when we're bringing in rams and how they bring that to the table. So genetic resistance to common diseases and parasites can be inherited from the buck. So selecting bucks with strong disease resistant traits can improve overall health and reduce veterinary costs for the herd. And we talked about longevity and durability before, but knowing that those bucks can increase our longevity and durability. Let's see. So our environment also will play a part in being able to our bucks to express this genetic his genetic component. So if we are housing our bucks in poor living conditions with inadequate nutrition and exposure to pathogens, then they are not able to express their genetic capabilities, and they may be able to actually be more susceptible to diseases. So ensuring that our environment is a healthy conditions for our bucks is very important. So there are critical periods of development for our bucks, and that is actually starts in gestation when they are gestating within the uterus of their dam, and the nutrition that she receives will be important for his growth and development, and that begins at gestation. And then early in life, the nutrition that he receives will help him to express those genetic components that he has. So there's some different health and disease concerns that we'll need to think about when we're having dairy goats. And so one of the most important, I've kind of outlined a few of the most important ones, foot rot and foot scald. This is a highly contagious pathogen that can be spread both by healthy looking feet and diseased looking feet. So we'll talk about foot rot and foot scald, CAE, and chlamydia, an abortive disease. And then erytheus we'll talk about for our rams, and then Clostridium type C and D. And then we'll also have parasites, internal and external. So these are the most concerning health and diseases of the goats. So foot rot is a contagious bacterial infection affecting the hooves. We'll also see breakdown and deterioration of the hoof with foot rot. Foot scald is a milder form of foot rot, also known as benign foot rot. It tends to not go into the hoof itself, but is a precursor to foot rot. So foot rot is caused by two bacteria that are present in the soil. They can be transmitted through the animals walking through contaminated spaces. They can be brought onto your farm by humans in their footwear if you visited a place that has foot rot. So you'll be making sure that you are not wearing your farm boots out and about, or vice versa. And so you'll see that foot rot needs both of these bacterial pathogens in order to happen. And then they'll also need moisture and anaerobic conditions. So we see foot rot and foot scald sometimes a lot more in confinement situations, or if we have a rainy fall or spring, and when our animals are continuously walking in wet and muddy conditions. That's when foot rot and foot scald seems to be more of a problem. Our symptoms are severe lameness, a foul odor, and like I said, necrosis of the hoof tissue. So once you have smelled foot rot and foot scald, you'll be able to locate it probably pretty readily. That smell has its smell of its own for sure. And then again, foot scald, mild lameness, redness in the interdigital skin, the skin that's in between the two hoof claws. Will be inflamed as well, and kind of it'll be moist in there as that bacteria is growing. Sometimes you'll see animals out in a grazing situation and they'll be kneeling down on their knees as they graze because those feet are very tender and they tend to lose weight because they're not wanting to walk out to pasture or to the feed and water. And so foot rot is actually a larger economic problem than we think about because of the loss of production that we have. So we know if our dairy animals are not up and eating, they're not producing as much milk, and then our young are not growing as fast, and then they're not able to fight off other infections as well. So foot rot can be more of a problem than just the hoof itself. So prevention, we'll want to have good hygiene and environmental controls, so maintain dry, clean living conditions. And the regular hoof inspections and trimmings are very important because that bacteria likes to hang out when in moist in airless area. So we can imagine that if that hoof wall is long or turned over, that bacteria is able to live in those places of the hoof. And that's how it's also spread when that animal with foot rot or bacteria walks through mud, and now they place bacteria in the environment, and then another hoof walks on there. So that's how they're picking it up and transmitting it between the herd mates. So another thing would be isolation and biosecurity. So isolate those new animals and check them because they could have not be showing symptoms, but they could be a carrier. And disinfect any equipment and footwear. And then also like your hoof trimmers and all those things need to be disinfected in between animals because like I said, healthy animals can be carrying the bacteria, and then if you spread it to a more susceptible animal that way. So disinfect your hoof trimmers and all that in between. And then if you are having a problem with foot rot, isolate those animals and treat them so that they're not continuing to spread that to other herd mates. So work with your veterinarian to create a treatment and prevention protocol, which sometimes may be an antibiotic or foot baths. It depends on what your veterinarian's protocol is and what you have tried in the past. And then hoof trimming as well, and topical treatments. And like I said, production loss, milk yield, and all those things as well. So now you're spending more time and labor out there taking care of hoof problems. So one of the best things is early detection so that you are, only treating a couple animals at a time other than your whole herd. This is a great diagram that I like to use on proper hoof trimming, making sure that you are removing that excess growth, not cutting too closely because that will allow the bacteria to integrate into the hoof wall. So proper trimming is of uttermost importance. Another disease that we talk about a lot when we talk about goats in particular or CAE. If you have other animals on your farm, it's sorry, I lost my train of thought. So it's similar to BIV or OPP in sheep. Another one you may be familiar with is the feline, immunodeficiency virus, which is FIV. So some of those are similar. So when we talk about sheep and goats, we mainly talk about CAE and OPP, and these are diseases that are economically important as well. So we have vertical transmission from doe to kids via colostrum and milk, and horizontal through direct contact, contaminated equipment, and breeding. It can be passed through semen during the mating process. So the symptoms, we have arthritis, which is chronic arthritis, swollen joints, lameness, and stiffness, and impacts mobility and ability to breed. So some of the things that we may be seeing later on as the disease progresses is loss of coordination, paralysis, and head tilt, and then chronic coughing and difficulty breathing as the disease progresses as well. So diagnosis, you would need to have an ELISA or a PCR blood test early on if you want to be able to start managing your herd and making sure that they are not CAE positive. So this is, if you're working towards this, another reason why it's important not to be bringing in animals that are positive for CAE, because they can be positive prior to showing signs and symptoms. So testing, culling, and isolating and colostrum management, since it can be spread through the colostrum, you can obtain a negative herd status through colostrum management and not allowing those kids to nurse colostrum from positive animals. So with biosecurity sanitation, artificial insemination, and CAE-free bucks in a process, you can eliminate CAE from your herds. Another disease that we talk about when we talk about reproductive diseases, chlamydia. It causes abortions and reproductive issues, and it can be transmitted as well on the buck side of things. So they cause weak kids and stillborns, and sometimes if you have a new infection from chlamydia, you can up to 60% of the does can abort out prior to kidding. So it's one of those diseases that you'll want to make sure that you're talking to your veterinarian about and preventing that at all costs when you're bringing in that new buck. So it's direct contact, feces, urine, milk, aborted fetal tissue, and placenta tissue. So if you are exhibiting some does that are having some abortions, cleaning up those fetal tissues and the placenta tissues and making sure that none of the other does have access to those tissues is important for biosecurity as well. So the abortions usually happen 3 to 4 weeks prior to kidding. Or if the kids are not aborted, they could be stillborn or weak and have other symptoms as well. So through observation and testing of the aborted fetuses and placentas, you can have a diagnosis of chlamydia. And then for prevention, there's not a labeled one for goats, but you can work through with your veterinarian and see if you can use the sheep vaccine. So also biosecurity and buck testing. And as a caution, this is zoonotic, means it can be transmitted to humans. So pregnant women and those women who would like to become pregnant should not be involved in the kidding or the lambing processes due to the risk to the human fetus. So make sure that you're wearing gloves and cleaning and disinfecting so that you are keeping yourself as safe as possible.
So Carolyn, we had a question come in about pasteurizing colostrum. So if we would pasteurize colostrum, would we be able to eliminate some of these diseases that you were mentioning?
Some of them, yes, but I just lost the word. The MAP pathogen has to go up to 60 degrees Celsius, and so that could actually break down and be more detrimental. So we say, yes, we can pasteurize the colostrum. However, it's not 100%. So it's better to use powdered colostrum at that time, a colostrum replacer at that time. So if you are wanting to be CAE negative, yes, you can pasteurize it, not 100%. So best bet would to be using pasteurized milk from negative does or powdered colostrum.
And I would just add, Carolyn, when we talk about colostrum, we actually want to use the term heat treated, right? So it's actually a lower temperature for a longer time versus pasteurization is a higher temperature for a shorter time. So we reduce that risk of, damaging those immunoglobulins in the milk. Yeah.
And if you want to know the specific protocols for each disease, we can just work that out at a later time. I don't have them specifically in this presentation at this time. Another disease that we need to think about on our bucks and our kids and our does is overeating disease from Clostridium perfringens type C and D, making sure that our does have those vaccinations prior to kidding at least 3 to 4 weeks so that they are able to build that into the colostrum at that time and protect their young. And tetanus is also something that we need to be worried about if we are castrating and dehorning our goats as well. So making sure that they are up to date on their vaccines is also important. So that it's normally, these bacteria are normally present in the environment and the intestines, and they rapidly reproduce when they are overfed, not overfed, but when they are sorry, I can't think of the words. When they so say they haven't nursed for quite a long time and they all of a sudden have a big belly full of milk or corn. We have happens a lot of times with corn. So those bacteria are then able to proliferate the system and overtake it and cause the overeating disease, what we call overeating disease. So, but a lot of time we don't notice the symptoms and we just notice kids that are dead. So we want to make sure that they do have this vaccine in order to prevent this. So other symptoms we could see would be diarrhea, paddling, abdominal pain. And the causes, like I said, is excessive consumption of high energy feeds like grains or milk. So when we feed kids on the bottle, making sure that when they're young, we are feeding them every 3 to 4 hours for the first couple of weeks and then extending that time as they get older. So I work with a lot of producers that like to only feed their goats twice a week, or twice a day. And that is when we can have overeating because they are being overconsumptive of that milk. So making sure that we are feeding them small amounts of milk frequently throughout the day. So like I said, prevention is our vaccination protocol. So kids, after they have about the time that we should be weaning them, 6 to 8 weeks, they should have their initial vaccination if their does were vaccinated prior to kidding. If their dams were not vaccinated prior to kidding, you'll want to move that up to about 3 to 4 weeks and then give a booster dose 3 to 4 weeks after that. And their adults will have their annual booster prior to lambing. Kidding, sorry. And then the bucks, they should have their initial vaccination. If that history is unknown, have that as soon as they arrive on the farm, and then 3 weeks after that, and have their annual booster so that you know that they have received adequate vaccination. So another issue that we want to think about when we have males on the farm is urinary calculi or bladder stone. These are caused by high grain diets with an imbalance of calcium and phosphorus ratios. So those ratios should be at 2 to 1. And then another thing, they should have sufficient water intake to make sure those calcium and phosphorus is moving through their system. So things you might see, they may be straining to urinate or inability to urinate, swollen abdomen and signs of pain, such as kicking at the belly. And then upon a physical examination, ultrasound, and radiography, you can find that they have those stones within their systems. The treatment should be immediate. This is a very painful condition that they are not able to clear on their own. So they'll have to have surgical options, or there's some non-surgical options, but the best tool is to prevent urinary calculi. It seems that once animals have a bout of this, they are more prone to having it in the future. So back to thinking about prior to the breeding season, we'll want to have what's called a breeding soundness exam. So that's an exam to make sure that your bucks are ready for the breeding season. So we'll do a body condition score and a structural soundness, making sure that they are sound on those feet and legs, that they are in proper body condition, and then checking for any disease or physical abnormalities. And the body breeding soundness exam should be done at least 1 month or before you'll want to have buck turnout, because they will need time. So let's say they've gone through an overheating event, or they've gone through a fighting bout with another herd mate. And if they've overheated, they will need about 6 weeks to recover spermogenesis, to create new sperm from that overheating event, or perhaps they have some damage to their testicles. So you'll want to make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to procure a new buck and to have that time of biosecurity. So that 30 days of housing them separately, so that you're able to maintain that high biosecurity for your flock. So upon a physical exam, we'll also do a test of the testicles and the epididymis to make sure that they are firm without lumps that may indicate issues with them. We'll also want to do a collection and evaluation of the sperm so that we can assess mobility, motility, morphology, and the concentration, so that making sure that they are producing an adequate of healthy sperm for the mating season. And knowing that sheep and goats are seasonal breeders, their normal breeding season is September through November. So if we're doing those breeding soundness exams earlier in the season, they may show low sperm counts and low mobility in their sperm because they have not gone into the rut, right? So they're not quite ready for that season change. There are some things that we can do with light therapies and light treatments to activate or simulate that shortening of the daytimes, but we'll have to begin those earlier in the spring. But knowing that there could be some seasonality difference in their BSE. Another thing we can think to look about, if they're starting to go into that rut, they're going to be doing excessive headbutting, urination, they're going to be making their blubbering and grumbling sounds. Rubbing on objects, they're going to be rubbing on objects to spread their scent from their scent glands onto the environment to bring those does into estrus. Increased activity, you may see them up and about, fighting, looking for does, and then curling their upper lip so that they can get the smell of the does. So they will release a pheromone through urination on their scent glands, and the smell of this, when the does are exposed to the pheromones through the urination and scent glands, then it will bring the does into estrus, and then that will increase the libido of the ram or the buck. So they kind of have this feeding off of each other that helps bring on the mating season. Oh, I do see it.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's another question in there. Well, there was a comment just about going back to the feeding, that sometimes it's more of a challenge to get more feedings in smaller amounts throughout the day, unless you have
Yes.
automatic feeders. So that's an option, but yeah, there's an investment into that. And then there's a question on, are boar bucks less affected by season or other breeds?
So it was thought that the boars would be less seasonal breeders, but we're finding out that they still have the seasonality. I've also heard that Kikos are less seasonal, and savannas as well, but they still tend to be more active in those fall months. But you can also use the light treatment on the bucks. So keeping the lights on from January through March will help them to come into season around May or June. So if you're wanting to move that up a little bit, you can do some light treatments for that. Also using cedars in the females, so those does are starting to show signs of estrus, then that might put your bucks into season as well. So kind of playing off those natural pheromones that each of them have could be another way to kind of break through that seasonality of the breeding conditions. And then also back on the feeding, you can also use a cold milk protocol where cold milk is available for the kids at all time. But if you're to do that, the milk needs to be between like 35 to 40 degrees to keep from spoiling and to keep from bacteria growth in there. So cold feeding is another way to make sure that they're getting access to milk frequently throughout the day. Okay. And I know I've talked a little bit about body condition score, but I'd like to kind of go into that in a little bit more detail. However, the pictures that I do have are of does, but if we can just think about how that would translate to looking on a buck, we can do that as well. And so, like I've stated before, body condition will change throughout the year. And because of that rut starting in September through November, our bucks should be in prime condition, body condition going into that because they are going to be more active. They're going to be walking the fences. They're going to be covering more area, fighting with other bucks and eating less. And so they are going to lose that body condition. And then they will keep that low until, February or March, but we can gain that condition before the next breeding season. And some places to look for body condition over the shoulder, over the rump is a good place to look for body condition. As I said there, and along the tail and the tail head. This is where they will start to deposit those extra fat, and then their muscle will also be building in those areas. I do have some pictures of some body condition scores. Again, these are females, but we can relate how they would be looking on our males. So a body condition score of 1, they are extremely thin, they're emaciated, they are lacking any fat or muscle cover, and their bones are clearly visible. And the junction of the neck and shoulder region is severe, and we can also see the scapular spine very clearly. So these animals are going to need some help. They're probably not healthy. They make, and this is usually what an animal in with yonis will tend to look like further into the disease. A body condition score, we can see that this animal is lean. However, they have more cover than the animal in the body condition 1. In the rump, we can see the bony contours, but we're able to see some fleshing of that areas as well. Body condition 3, they are still lean and long, but they're blending smoothly into the shoulder and the briskets, and the rib has moderate degree of fleshing, but they are still visible. In the rump, the hips and pins are clearly visible, but the bony contours are less and well-defined, and moderate muscling makes the dorsal processes of the rump less visible. And going into body condition 4, now we're getting into some animals that are over conditioned, and we really don't want to see them up into the 4s very often. 4 would only be like prior to kidding. We wouldn't want them to be in 4 at breeding time, knowing that they're going to gain more as they go on. But the underline of the neck is smooth. There's some flesh on the brisket, and the neck is still blends. And then the rump and the hips and pins are rounded and smooth by overlying tissues. And then going into, oops, I have it wrong. This is body condition 5. Sorry for that. But these animals are beginning to be obese, they're going to have problems rebreeding and producing the milk that they should. So making sure that we are observing our animals for body condition scores and adjusting nutrition as we see fit. So moving on to nutrition, our growth and development, adequate nutrition is crucial for growth and development of our young bucks. Like I said before, gestation, while they're in utero in those early months, making sure that they are getting the adequate nutrition that they need to reach their genetic potential is important. So bucks require a balanced diet to maintain their optimal body condition, which is essential for effective breeding. And their malnutrition can reduce their libido. It can make poor semen quality and lower fertility rates. And they will need their nutrients just as the female herd. They'll need their protein, vitamins, minerals for sufficient sperm production and overall reproductive health. And they'll also need adequate nutrition to maintain their immunity, support their immune system, and to keep up with the physical demands of the breeding season. So our body condition, we'll want to make sure they're not underweight or overweight to keep up with longevity. So talking about protein, energy, minerals, vitamins, and water are the most important nutrients. And so we'll go through some of those. So proteins, just like in humans, is important for muscle development, is important for the buck's reproductive health and sperm production, their overall body growth, and maintaining body tissue and maintenance. We get protein from high quality forages and legumes like alfalfa and commercial feeds formulated with adequate protein. So we tend to feed like a 14 to 18% protein for our mature and our growing and mature bugs. Energy is important for metabolic functions, which increases during the breeding season. So sometimes we can offer them supplements in the forms of grain and oats. And we would like to, if we're needing to supplement them, we could feed them around a pound of grain per day. And also they can consume the same diet ration as the milking herd mates. So minerals, all these minerals are important that they are receiving. You can do that in a free access to free salt and mineral. So calcium, phosphorus, that's the one that we have to be making sure that it's in balance of 2 to 1. And we'll need that for bone development, reproductive health, and making sure that's in balance so that we're not getting their urinary calculi and to build those strong bones. Zinc is important for skin health, immune function, and sperm production, selenium, muscle function, reproductive health, and a deficiency would cause white muscle disease. So if you're in an area that the soils are selenium deficient, then we could think that our forages would be as well. So making sure that our forages and feeds meets those selenium requirements. If you are in a deficient area, have a discussion with your veterinarian about supplementing with a selenium product when the kids are born. And then they can get these from mineral supplements, balanced commercial feeds, or high quality forages. Vitamins A, D, and E are important as well, and they can be added to forages. Once our forages are stored for a long time, our vitamins A, D, and E tend to degrade over time. So if we're still feeding stored forages at this time in the year or prior to breeding season, if we have a drought, we'll make sure that we are having our A, D, and E added because those will have degraded over time. But fresh forages tend to be adequate in vitamins A, D, and E. And the most important nutrient of all is water. So make sure that we always have a clean, fresh source always available to them. And a little bit on housing. Well, winter is probably the time that we most adequately provide shelter for our bucks, but we'll want to make sure that those shelters are dry, draft free for our young stock. So like a three-sided shelter or open south-facing building is adequate shelter for them in the winter. We'll want to prevent respiratory issues with ventilation. Sometimes we'll like to just bundle them up in a building, but making sure that there is adequate ventilation is important to make so that ammonia buildup and pathogens are moving throughout the building. Bedding should be clean, dry, and fluffy. We can use straw or wood shavings. However, we want to make sure that we are using dried wood shavings. Wet shavings can harbor bacteria. And the space requirements we should be thinking about for our bucks are 20 to 25 square feet. That's if they're enclosed. If they have additional space on a dry lot or a run, that would be great. Feeder space, thinking about 18 to 24 inches per buck. So that is all I have for you all. If you have any questions, we can do that as well.
Thanks, Carolyn. And as people want to type questions in the chat box, you can do that right now. I also did put in the chat box the link to today's webinar evaluation. If you wouldn't mind, before you log off here today, to click on that link, it'll take you to a short evaluation, just so we can keep up on our dairy goat webinar series and know what topics are pertinent to you, and it also helps with our future education programs. So again, I want to thank you for being here today, Carolyn. I have one question. So how often should you introduce genetics into the herd? So you have this buck. I mean, how often would you suggest kind of getting new genetics into the herd?
Sure, and that's gonna probably be dependent on the size of your herd. So if you have, 5 or 6 does, you're gonna have to be bringing in more frequently. If you have a larger amount of does, then you can actually start producing your own, males to use through selective breeding of those female lines. So it kind of is really dependent on your system, but I would think every 2 to 3 years if you're a smaller producer to prevent, inbreeding.
Thanks.
Mhm.
And then one other question, kind of going back to biosecurity, and just talking about, do you find that producers share bucks? Like, so you have a buck that goes from one farm to the next, and what types of things would you I mean, I guess kind of going through that biosecurity plan, right, of quarantining and things, but any suggestions or comments?
I would say if they're regularly sharing, then their herds could probably be at the same level. Because if they are routinely, have a system where they're going back and forth, they're probably share the same health status. But it's when you go to borrow from an outside source that you haven't been in contact with before. So doing those biosecurity screens before even borrowing one, you'll want to make sure that, because we talked a lot about diseases, but we didn't talk about parasites. So we can also be bringing in resistant parasites. So then now we're having another issue to think about. So having that 30-day biosecurity is great, but also screening for the Johne's CAE, CL prior to bringing them in. And then, if you're vaccinating for chlamydia or some of those other abortive diseases, make sure those people that you are borrowing from are on the same vaccination schedules would also be important to do.
Thanks. And then I also see just a comment here of a resource. People would recommend that people look at the OPP CAE prevention and elimination protocols. There's one from University of Minnesota if they're interested in a CAE-free herd. I also know our Center for Food Security and Public Health has a lot of good resources on biosecurity and prevention protocols that could also be used as well. So I appreciate you putting that into the chat box here.
We didn't really go into a full-on protocol, but that would be a great place to to think about if you're wanting to eliminate that from your herd. Exactly. Mhm.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other comments or questions coming into the chat. So I want to thank everybody for participating here today. And we hope to see you back here on May 15th as we talk about antimicrobial stewardship with Dr. Pat Gordon. So with that, thanks and have a good rest of your day.